Okay, so today we're going to continue with chapter 11 of the Birchbark House. You need to have your book in front of you and be on page 175. And we're midway down the second paragraph. Ready? Okomayas knew that her Nokomis told her this story for a larger reason than just because she asked for it. She thought many times of this muskrat diving down, down, down for that little bit of dirt that made the world. She imagined Muskrat finally pulling to the very bottom and grasping that bit of earth in its tiny paws. If such a small animal could do so much, Nokomis always said, after she'd finished the story, your efforts are important too. As if he had understood Grandma's story, Andag made his own effort. Her crow hunted mice these lean days, and more savage intentions than when merely keeping them away from his family of humans. He hunted for survival. The bird eagerly awaited any mouse who dared enter the house. Hungrily, Ondag dropped and struck hard, killing the little animal and quickly eating it. Ondag also hunted in the woods for seeds and nuts catched by squirrels. That winter, Ondag found a little hollow in the tree next to the cabin. Some squirrel had filled the hollow with acorn seeds, hazelnuts, enough to feed the family for a day or two. Neshke, said Mamma, her hands full one morning, look what that good bird found for us. Ondag was looking at the food cachet as though he wasn't quite sure he'd meant to share, but Mamma was pleased. She scattered a big load of acorns on the hearthstones and looked at them with satisfaction before she began to break the little shells with her smoothest pounding rock. She shelled the acorns, ground them fine, roasted them with a bit of cornmeal, and that night the family had sweet acorn cakes. From the last cone of maple sugar she made a taste of syrup for them all, and that night, at least, they went to sleep with a comfortable warmth in their stomachs. All of them, before sleeping, thanked Ondag, who, though he usually slept outside, was invited to sleep that night. He sat above the fire on a thick twig perch. Day had fastened between the mortared stones. Andag preened his feathers, very glad to be so warm, bobbed his sleek head, and blinked his brilliant eyes. Tomorrow, resolved Omakayas, now that she had a bit of strength, she would make her small, important effort like the muskrat. She would go out with Ondag and find more squirrel cachets in the woods. She didn't reckon on her own weakness, however, nor could she ever have imagined the swiftness of old Tallow's justice. The day dawned pure and cold. Nokomis and Mamma mixed up some water with thin paste of acorn flour left from the night before. Day came in with a fish so tiny and poor-looking that, in spite of their hunger, everyone laughed out loud when he lifted it proudly into the air. Everyone, that is, except Mamma. She just rested her eyes a little more softly on her husband than usual and went on with her beadwork. Omakayas, ready to do her part, dressed in her warmest clothes, wrapped lengths of rabbit skin around her feet, put moccasins over them, and then, Ondag on her shoulder, went to look for the squirrel cachets. Although she had finished with Nokomis, this was the first time Omakayas had ventured into the woods since the day she had entered the cabin. On that day she had followed the sickness inside and determined to do battle with the evil spirit of the disease. She had lost her beloved Niwo. Now she decided that she would not lose any of her family to the weakness of hunger. She would find food somewhere. Dizziness overcame her. Her knees felt watery and her blood ran thin. She paused, holding on to a tree, and made her way toward the woods beyond. First, she had to pass old Tallow's place, and she narrowed her eyes at the path and stepped forward with determined quickness, prepared not to stop until Ondag told her where to find more nuts and acorns. She didn't reckon on the yellow dog. He was there in her path as she neared old Tallow's cabin. She wouldn't look at him, she decided, but she couldn't help remembering the words his look had given her last summer. Wait until next time. I'll get you then. I'll get you when no one is around. What could he do to her? Even in her weakness, she would be mentally stronger. She would show him no fear. But as though he sensed the truth of her condition and not the determined pluck of her heart, the yellow dog stepped forward. As always, he snarled and then retreated when Okomias grabbed a stick. When she banished the stick, however, a spinning haze of brilliant dots flooded before her eyes. Suddenly it was as though she had stepped over the edge of a black cliff. She stumbled, fainted to the ground. The yellow dog lunged forward. Ondag screamed and tore with his beak at the dog's eyes, but the dog was eager at last to get the better of a human. As the clumsiest hunting dog of old Tallow's pack, he needed to stand tall over something, even if it only a sick little girl. Okomias groped for her stick, but suddenly the yellow dog had it in his teeth. He growled, worried the stick as though he'd caught a gopher, then dropped it and with an eager bite tore into the blanket that fell from her arm. With a vicious lunge, he bit Okomias above the wrist and jumped back, eyes blazing with cowardly triumph. Okomias tried to yell, but her voice stuck in her throat, a squeak. She felt a rushing blackness overwhelm her again, tried to throw herself upward, tried to growl back and challenge the dog. With excitement, though, the dog realized he had her at his mercy at last. He jumped forward. This time he fell upon her leg and bit deep. Okomias heard a loud scream, her own scream, and pain blotted her sight then as she swirled into the dark. She woke a moment later in old Tallow's arms. What happened? Nearby the yellow dog cringed and tried to slink away from old Tallow's glare. Seeing that Okomias was all right, old Tallow carefully put the girl down. With a swift, bear-like swipe, she grabbed the dog and held him by the scruff of the neck with one hand. He whimpered and snarled at Okomias as though to say, "She made me do it." Old Tallow shook her head sadly and lifted her axe. Ignoring Okomias, who panted weakly on the snowy ground, old Tallow spoke to her dog as she would to a human. Sadly and firmly holding him by the neck, she told the dog what he had done. "Didn't I warn you? Didn't I say to you? Didn't I tell you many times that you must never hurt this one?" "Yes, Nadai, you look at me now with pleading eyes, but I spared you many times before. Each time I spared your life, I always told you what would happen if you were so foolish again. Now, my foolish friend, you must die." With that, old Tallow brought the blunt end of her axe down on the yellow dog's head. He crumpled to the ground. "Aye, my auntie!" The yellow dog had hated her, perhaps even meant to kill her, but Okomias hadn't counted on such a cruel and sudden end to the dog's cowardly life. Old Tallow's justice was harsh. Her sentence was carried out in an instant, But that didn't mean that her heart was hard or that she didn't mourn for her friend. It just meant that Omachias was more important. The last that Omachias saw of the yellow dog, he was bundled in old Tallow's arms. The strong old woman was walking away, and in her step there was the sadness of parting with an old but dangerously foolish friend. Omachias got slowly to her feet, wobbled forward, and knew she would have to return to the cabin. She still wasn't strong enough to hunt for food. With Ondeg's encouragement, she made it to the back door and fell through, her vision darkening. Her stomach creaked, so empty it stuck to the back of her body. She needed Grandma's help to dress the bites that throbbed and stung. They must have food. They must have food. Soon they must eat, she knew, or they would all lie in the ground with the two who had gone before. It was the great buck One Horn who saved them, who gave them his life. Grandma woke 2 mornings later and called Day Day to her side to talk, for she was so weak from hunger she could only sit wrapped in her blanket by the fire. I dreamed last night, she told him, and now you must do everything just as I say. Day Day listened intently. Take the small path to the north that leads past the fish camp, said Grandma, gesturing slowly. She squinted, looked deeper into her dream, nodded slowly. When you come to the tallest of the trees, go toward the lake, then around the rocks and back into the trees. There, the buck will wait for you. Day Day knew when Grandma dreamed, especially in this extremity. It was a true dream and must be followed. First, however, he prepared himself carefully to meet the animal's spirit. He washed, put on his best clothing, new moccasins, and had Mama comb and braid his hair. He cleaned and oiled his new gun and prepared it with extra care. Then he went immediately out and followed Grandma's directions exactly, just as she had said. In the clearing, past the rocks and back in the trees, One Horn was waiting. The great buck stood in the calm light. Day Day lifted his gun, breathed his hopes, then thanks. One shot. The shot went true. One Horn died easily, right then. Day Day gave tobacco to the deer's spirit and thanked him, brought back as much as he could carry, then buried the rest of the deer in snow. Returning, he gave the venison to his starving family and to Tallow, who shared it out to Auntie Muskrat, to La Patre's hungry children, and to Fishtail. That night, as Omachias ate the stew of venison that Mamma cooked, she felt herself grow stronger with each bite. She remembered the day she and Angeline stood before the beauty of One Horn. They had looked on him amazed, and he did not run away. He had known at that time that they would need his very existence. Again, Omachias remembered the proud, soft radiance of his soft brown eyes. She closed her eyes and saw One Horn feasted, honored, and decorated with her grandmother's finest beadwork. Opening her eyes again, she thanked the animal for saving her life, and then just as she finished thinking this solemn thought, Pinch, whose belly was full, backed up too close to the hearth and set the seat of his pants on fire. "Mama!" He jumped away, a little flame shooting from his rear. In sudden inspiration, he sat down directly in the water bucket. Everyone looked at him, at first in shock, and then once he was seen to have suffered no harm, it was Mama, first of all, who started to laugh. And Pinch laughed too. Laughed so hard that he wedged his behind farther into the bucket and could not get out. Laughed and laughed, harder and harder. After that terrible winter, as though he understood from then on how important it was to be funny, Pinch gave laughter to them all. He became a joker, a trick player. and joked on himself as well as others. Perhaps it was the first saving laugh, the best thing any of them had had since before the death of Niwo, that made him proud. He had saved his family in a way, every bit as much as One Horn. The great deer had saved their bodies, and Pinch's absurd jump had saved their souls. For Nokomis said shortly after her own grandmother had believed that the soul of the Anisabeg is made of laughter. If there is no laughter, the soul dies. Pinch brought laughter back to life. He brought their souls back into their bodies. The harder they laughed, the more they knew now that they would survive. Ziwon, spring.